Hello, my name is Guy and you're watching How to Be a Great GM. Today we're looking at adding backstory to your players' characters. Why would we want to add backstory to our players' characters? Isn't that their job? Quite simply, the answer is no. You're missing out on a great opportunity if you are the Dungeon Master and you don't do this. Why? Why is this so important? Let's jump into it. When we add backstory, we are effectively adding to the narrative of our players' characters, and in doing so, we are creating a world that is real to the player character and that invests the player as well. You're suddenly saying your character's backstory that you wrote out, I'm adding a little bit to it, but we're not going to add in a complete story. That belongs to the player. It's a collective that we're involved in here, a narrative collective. So we've got to make sure that what we are adding in allows for collective addition, not just us adding in an entire chapter in this poor PC's life. So we start by saying, what actually happened? What is it that we want to add into this backstory to effectively create a quest? The quests that are going to come out of these kinds of things, of adding in a character backstory, is quite literally going to be exploring an aspect of this individual so that we as the game master, so that the players and their characters learn a little bit more about the character that they're on a journey with. These are great adventures to add to your campaign in between the main event. It builds a whole lot of things, and principally it tells the players, I as the game master respect your character and your story, and I want to make sure that you feel as if you're part of my game because my game includes parts of you. Sounds weird, but how do we do this? So we look at the attitude of the PCs. That's an important thing to understand, is if the PCs are angry all the time, what was the reason for that anger? Their backstory might hint at it. Their backstory might say they were raised by slavers, and so, you're angry because you're allowed to be. You have a horrid background. That could be one. It could also not be included in the backstory. So there's something that you could look at. You know, your PC is always argumentative. Where did that come from? What inspired that? Let's go find out. And you can now create this, or start to create this backstory that's going to lead us into learning more about the character. We then need to decide on what type of quest is this going to lead us to. Is it a thwarting quest? Is it a discovery quest? Is it a delivery quest? Or is it a collecting quest? As you can see, the whole idea is that if one PC's backstory is a thwarting backstory where they have to go and stop an ancient evil uncle who was around when they were young and has now taken control of the family farm, that's a thwarting adventure. On the other hand, it could be a case of, you remember your aunt that you were so fond of? She's died, and you need to come to town to collect her heirlooms that belong to the family. It's a collection adventure where, of course, they get there, they collect the things, but en route they're attacked by assassins, there's a dragon that gets involved. What are these heirlooms that they are collecting? This is a very interesting story. If it's delivery, well, there's other options that we can go with there, and of course if it's discovery, who or what is behind whatever is happening, etc. Understand your players as well. It's important to realize that your players might not like this tampering. They might not like you adding in the fact that in the character's backstory there was this diabolical act. They might go, well, my character would never do that. My character doesn't do that. And so we turn to holes. Create this event. I'm going to try and point to this now. What is the attitude? Where did that come from? What's the type of adventure? Understand the player, and then we create holes within the narrative. So we don't explain the narrative specifically. We don't say, here is your story. We allow the PCs to tell us the story, and this is how we do it. Yeah, we had holes. We had holes in everything. We couldn't understand where, why, who done it, why'd they do it, what was their name. The idea of leaving holes in a backstory is specifically so that the player can start to incorporate it into their own story. Remember, this is collaboration. This isn't just you dictating what happened in the past. In the past. The idea here is that when you create the backstory, you say things like, this happened 25 years ago, when you were doing what? Let the player fill in the details. I was working as a farmer. I was a detective with a bad accent. Whatever they want, the goal is to let them fill in that detail. So what happens is suddenly your little seed of 25 years ago, the player now takes it and internalizes it. Alternatively, if you just say 25 years ago when you were working as a detective, the player is going to go, well, I don't think I would have been a detective. I don't think I would have been. In other words, all you are doing is laying down moments and opportunities for the player to fill in the details. Let them give you the color, you just provide them the base. I think it's pretty simple, but make sure you don't overprescribe. 25 years ago, whilst you were doing X, you were then involved in Y, and that caused this to happen. What was this? What was Y? And what was X? That's for the player to find out. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so we've got this space starting to happen. What's next? Next is that we need to know who else knows. So the PC is now starting to develop this background. The player is starting to think, how can I incorporate this idea with that idea? How can I move forward? Now we need to give a name. There must be something. If the player's background says they were raised in isolation, invent a name. But you need to insert some names. And if necessary, give those names to the player. If the player doesn't have the names in their backstory, certainly do that. Be aware that if the player has a long-lost lover in their backstory, and you want to use that lover in the adventure, make sure that the player is happy with that. And then add a family member. Always add a family. Family members are brilliant. They come from all over the place. Everybody had to be born at some point. Everybody had a maker, an original creator. Go and draw on that. Those creators might have had brothers or sisters or stepbrothers or aunts or uncles, or hell, even the postman's wife, sisters, brothers, uncles, aunt, daughter, who was the secretary to the family, might know the character. You can build a link somehow into the character. So make it a family member. Why add a family member? It makes it personal. It tells the players this is not necessarily something that can be ignored or trifled with. This is important, or should be important, to your character. And this is not plot related necessarily. It's unlikely. I mean, sure, maybe the character, one of the characters is the lead hero in the story, in which case family might be used all the time. But generally speaking, when family are involved, this is now a personal story. And then determine the intent. So if it is a thwarting adventure, is the family member trying to do something, taking over the family farm, reinvesting in a new starship, all those kinds of things? Is their intent good or is it bad? Is it maybe they don't have an intent? If it is a collection or a discovery or even a delivery, what if the players are delivering their own family member, player character's own family member, into a dangerous situation? Or they have been found that they're in a dangerous situation and they must now be saved from that. So it depends. What is the intent? What is the entire purpose behind it? But family is important. Well, of course, family is important. A lot of players are not going to have family in their backstory. They're going to literally just pretend they didn't even exist, or they all died. That doesn't mean you can't include family in your little backstory that you're creating in your plot. A long-lost aunt, a person of interest from some distant part. I was the old man who used to take your father's dogs for walks, and we were this close. Yes, I met him twice, once bringing the dogs back, and once bringing them, that kind of stuff. When you can find anything and create anything if you just think about, the character's they were raised by wolves, and they never met nobody.
Well, that's fine, because the wolf is now the main reason for the entire little side story. Use that. The wolf died 20 years ago. Everyone was killed. I am alone. Well, maybe there was a trade. Oh, I used to watch you as a boy. You were at the wolves there all day now, so sad. But I was there. I watched you from a distance. I love you. I don't know where that came from, but you can drive through. You get my point.
So the idea is that we are building this narrative. The last thing that we need to add is the outcome. What happens if there is no action? If the PCs just don't. They don't care. They don't follow through. The adventure runs in the background, and you don't ever have to worry about adding these kinds of backstory adventure quests into your game ever again. And perhaps it's time to look for new players as well. I know that sounds harsh, but if the players are not interested and they only want to solve the problem because that's the problem, and all that backstory stuff is just too emo nonsense, namby-pamby, wishy-washy, fidgety-fudgely nonsense, then you as the dungeon master or the game master are perhaps not being allowed to explore your full creative potential because of this limited focus. So, if they don't do anything, but they don't do anything because they can't in actual game. Oh, your aunt on the 5th moon of wherever needs to be rescued. We're on the other side of the galaxy and our ship is broken. That's on you, GM. You should have made sure that when you're introducing this new quest, it is achievable by the characters within the space of time that they have allocated, and that is the important thing. You must allocate time in your plot for the PCs to take action.
Time is always going to be on your side. You control the speed at which everything happens. So if the players feel like they can't leave the main plot because in 5 days' time the world is gonna end, it don't matter what kind of story you're putting into this background character development story, they ain't gonna do it because saving the world is more important. However, if you've painted yourself into a corner and you've said the world is going to end in 5 days, if you don't fix it, it's all done, and then you want to have this backstory moment, it's as simple as pie to have some other organization cause a delay. The PCs find some kind of bad guy who reports that there's been a delay because some other organization attacked the boss's forces and now they've got to regroup, or the device is no longer operational and it's going to take them a couple of days. A, it makes the PCs feel like the world is living and breathing. B, it buys them some time. C, it allows you to add in a complication to your story. Who is this other organization that caused a delay? All those kinds of things should be playing in your mind so that you can give the PCs enough time to go off and do these side quests. Having said that, you need to watch out. If they run out of time, there need to be consequences. If you don't do this, your game is going to feel exceptionally overbearing to the players. I know, I do this all the time. I literally got to one point where a player turned to me and said, "There are so many quests that need to be done now that I don't know which one to choose." And you don't want that. You don't want them to have to choose between one or the other, unless it's a specific setup you're going for. But generally speaking, you want the players to be able to go on each quest. Think of it in terms of time management on your behalf, and it's not difficult to insert a little bit of time into this whole thing. So what is the time frame? How long should it take the PCs to do this, and how long can they delay something? This is important. If you are offering them a quest that is going to delay them for years, they may not take it. At the same time, if it's just an hour-long journey, they may not take it either because it might not be worth their time. So you need to balance how long is it going to take and what is their current quest going to do whilst they're on this. That's important. However,
Even though you've now made space in your campaign for the players to play in and to go on this quest, you must still put time in there because there should be pressure. There should be ramifications. If the PCs don't do it within a certain time, they will fail, and that then leads us to the ramifications. What are the ramifications, and how do we do that? So that's another important thing is how do we put this pressure on? How do we run these games without losing a sense of timing? Even though they had been given vast amounts of time, the important thing to bear in mind is that when they run out of time, if you've given them a time frame and they run out, what are the ramifications? Is the family member dead? Is the story dead? Can they pick it up at a later stage? Is there some way in which you can bring it back? Does it mean the PCs didn't really care? There's a very big indicator that what PCs do, what they choose to do, is where their interest lies. Use that, but make sure to keep pressure on them. So although you might have given them time with the main story, the secondary plot, this little side quest that you've created, if they don't do it in a timely manner, end it. It doesn't matter. It ain't part of the big story. It is simply something for fun. If the PCs are dragging their feet, they're probably not interested in it anyway, in which case you should move on and get back to your main plot. It's simple as that, really. Once we've got this in place, we've worked out how we're going to fit this all in, and everything is now going to be working, that allows us to add in these very interesting backstories, these very interesting ideas that really incorporate the player into the game in a way that we haven't before realized, perhaps. They are now invested because this real life situation, we've all had it. And that for me is the key takeaway from this particular video, is if you can emulate what happens in real life to the players themselves, it makes the game feel more real. Now, by that, I mean it's not a case of going through the player's personal history and pulling out stuff to get them to go through that. Absolutely not. And you should be very careful if you are handling delicate situations that could have intense emotional attachment on behalf of the player. That goes without saying. The important thing is that when we talk about flying on a starship through space, we don't have any personal context. We don't do that yet as a species, at least not in the way that we talk about in science fiction. So there's no grounding, there's no reality. But when that starship comes across the annoying mother-in-law or the brother who is a layabout and doesn't do anything and just sits around all day, that is something that a lot of us will have a connection to. Everybody has an uncle who drinks a little bit too much, is slightly slimy, and no one really likes it. He's always around because he's rarely into family. He just is a greaseball. We all have I beg your pardon, we all have those. So include that into your game. Find bits of reality that you can insert into your narrative, and your narrative, your story, your adventure becomes that much realer because we identify with it rather than just having to imagine what it's like. Adding in these little moments, adding in these backstory quests will raise your game to the next level like you cannot believe, and I cannot emphasize enough how much fun you can have whilst planting these very loosely woven whole adventures all over the place and letting the players help you to create something truly awesome from their backstory. Until next time, however, well, I apologize. My accent was just everywhere today. It's just crazy. This is a new thing we're trying out, so give me some leeway. Now, if you want to support the channel, head on over to our Patreon, where we've got a whole bunch of things that you can get. There's a podcast that comes out every week. Currently, a series is called Dungeons of Diabolical Design, which is where I have a whole bunch of friends who come along and we design a dungeon in our heads, speaking about the philosophical institution as to how one would design a dungeon. And let me tell you, some of the options we come up with is pretty damn crazy. It sounds like a lot of fun to play. So we got that. We got a whole bunch of maps for you. We got adventures for you every month. Have a look, support the channel, see what you like, and well, that's the end of this video and the accent.